Welcome back to another episode of Your Hope-Filled Perspective, where it's always our goal to restore hope, renew minds, and empower listeners to live in your God-given identity. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Bengtson, and I so appreciate when you spend a few minutes of your week with us. We've been in the midst of a Sacred Scar story series. I've been talking with real people who have gone through real painful trials, but who have come out on the other side and are willing to share the beautiful sacred scars that God has brought for their pain, beauty for their ashes, if you will. In my book, Sacred Scars, resting in God's promise that your past is not wasted, we focus on the fact that in the hands of a good and redemptive God, those most painful trials in our life can serve a beautiful purpose if we'll surrender it to the Lord. I'm excited to share a new guest to the podcast with you today. It's Georgia Shaffer, who's an author, a licensed psychologist, and a professional certified coach. In 2023, the International Christian Coaching Association chose her as the Christian Coach of the Year. She's written many books, including A Gift of Morning Glories, Restoring Your Life After Loss, and Taking Out Your Emotional Trash. Georgia offers individual and group coaching online, including Rebuild After Divorce. And we will put all the information about how to find Georgia, her books, and her ministry in the show notes that you can find at drmichelleb.com. But in the meantime, would you give a warm, hope-filled perspective welcome to Georgia Shaffer?
Thank you.
Georgia, I'm thrilled that you are here. I know that clinically you have a lot of experience working with people who have gone through some devastating hurts and trials. And yet, as a mental health professional, that does not give you immunity to life's difficult circumstances. And what I've found is that so often our greatest areas of ministry come out of some of our greatest wounds and painful experiences. So I wonder if you might share with our listeners something that you've gone through that's brought about physical, emotional, relational, or maybe spiritual pain, or some combination.
Yeah, about 9 years old, I had been divorced and single for a number of years, and I was dating a man, and he asked me to marry him. So I was engaged. And of course, it was very exciting. And when all of a sudden he ended the relationship, I knew things he was withdrawing, but wasn't quite sure what was going on. And the during that time, I had been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. I was getting treatments for stage 4 lung cancer and given about 1 year to be alive. But he had asked me to marry him after that diagnosis. So the decision I came to in my mind is I must be a really horrible person because this is a man who's taught discipleship at our church. Again, it wasn't the diagnosis because he had asked me to marry him after it. And so that's the only conclusion I could come to. Something was terribly wrong with me. And what made it even more wounding is I had written a number of books on healthy relationships, our relational blind spots, how to be a healthy Christian single in today's culture. So it was like, great. That only added even more to the shame and the pain.
Talk about that aspect, because that's what I'm seeing as I'm listening to people share their sacred scar stories. Pain takes us to a place of great vulnerability. And frequently, when we are so vulnerable, that's when the enemy's attack is the greatest. And a common thread that I'm hearing through people's stories is that they have experienced shame, guilt, remorse, regret, insecurity, and attack on their identity, or even just limiting their ability to walk in freedom in Christ. And you being the professional who had walked with many, many individuals, you'd written the books, you'd coached them. What messages were you hearing, and how did shame present itself to you? Because I think sometimes shame is kind of a nebulous term that it's kind of like peace or joy. Like, how do you get your arms around it?
Well, first, I was sure God would never use me again as far as helping others and in my ministry. And the shame I felt was there was something terribly wrong with me. Now, I knew God loved me, but what I didn't feel is that I was lovable. And so, and when what happened was a couple of months after this experience, the pastors at my church uncovered what had been going on. And this particular man had been counseling somebody, a married woman, and was having an affair. So on the one hand, when that was revealed, I felt better. But on the other hand, talk about shame, I felt like such a fool. How could I not see this? I had invited people into my life. And part of it was they didn't see it either, but still that feeling of I'm just not lovable. And that's why I'm at this place right now in my life.
When I was treating patients for depression in my private practice over a decade ago, I went through a severe bout of clinical depression. And that was exactly the same place that I landed, where you landed, where I thought, God's never going to be able to use me in this ministry again because I should have known better. I should have been able to prevent this. I help other people. Why couldn't I see it in myself? And I think that's one of the arrows of the enemy is to attack our area of ministry because he knows our potential. So how did you move from a place of thinking, how can God use me ever again, to experiencing healing for that wound? And if I may be so bold, is to experience some good come out of it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, God brought a very supportive community around me. I had an excellent Christian counselor. And when I would go to this place, God's never going to use me, he continually reminded me, first of all, don't focus on all the pain and all that was wrong, but focus on God and how God took this particular man out of ministry, but not to allow Satan to destroy me through it, nor ruin my ministry. And he kept saying, this is going to make you more powerful to work with others who are in that single. And when you're going through that shame and you feel like a fool, and who wants to be a fool, you can't see things clearly. And so when I had this community around me, whether it be my church family, the pastors, who, like I said, uncovered this, my friends were all part of that supportive community and kept speaking truth. Here's reality. Here's who you are in Christ. And I can remember one Christian friend, more than once I said, I'm just so ashamed. And she said, why are you ashamed? He should be the one that is ashamed. So they kept bringing me back to the truth and what was real. And then what happened is, as I was processing all the emotional pain and the feelings of anger and sadness and guilt and so on, at some point in that healing process and the forgiveness, I started getting calls asking me to do more speaking and even to do speaking to Christian singles who were single again. And so that too was encouraging. Even if I shared with people, what I had gone through, they weren't saying, no, we can't use you. Because the truth was, I had experienced deceit, betrayal, shame on a whole deeper level. So I was going to be more powerful to help others because I knew what that was like on a deeper level.
That is a way that God has redeemed that pain. Not that you would want to go through that experience again. That's not what we're saying, but that over time, as healing took place through the wise counsel of many, God's been able to bring healing, and your story is more powerful because now you can minister to those who have gone through similar circumstances, and they don't want to be in those circumstances any more than you did.
Right. Yeah.
What advice would you give as a mental health professional to someone who's in a situation right now that they never asked for? And it's perhaps of no fault of their own. What advice would you give them?
First of all, I would say don't isolate yourself because then the lies of the enemy. And so when God brought that supportive community, who's your supportive community? Who are the truth tellers that will remind you of the truth and God's love and how you are lovable despite your beliefs? And so, yeah, gather that supportive community Know this is going to be a tough time. Allow yourself the time to grieve and feel all those awful feelings that you're sure will kill you. But know that's the path to healing and a new beginning. So even though you can't see it right now, God is working behind the scenes. And eventually, I don't know what the time frame is, you're going to start to see the gifts and the way he can use you on a deeper, powerful level for him.
Georgia, if a listener is listening in on our conversation and they're resonating with your experience in some way, whether it's through relationship pain or it's just something that's going on in their life and they didn't want any part of it, but they feel thrust into it, what hope-filled perspective would you want to leave them with today?
You're going to learn new things about yourself, things that you didn't even see through this difficult experience. You can become a better person, an inner strength you didn't know you had. You can learn in the midst of these tough times what God can do, how he can take that inconsolable pain if you go to him and you can experience his comfort. So this is an opportunity, even though you don't want it, even though it's awful to go through. Just know that you might question, well, what did I do? Or why did this happen to me? And those are hard questions, but at some point you got to surrender them and just pay attention to God's hand in your life, his love for you.
I think that's so important. When we focus on the pain, that's all we can see. And it just seems to get worse. It's like the dark clouds get darker. But
Yeah.
when we focus on the fact that God promises he can work all things together for good. So it's a matter of, are we going to focus on the problem or are we going to focus on the problem solver? So I appreciate that perspective. Georgia, I know that there are people who are listening to our conversation today and they'd love to find out more about you, more about your work towards healthy relationships, the books you've written, the coaching that you do. What's the best place for them to find you?
On my website, georgiashaffer.com, but Shaffer has a million spellings. So it's GeorgiaShaffer.com. And one of the things through this journey is God, through a number of people, I started a group for rebuild after divorce. And so if somebody's interested in that, they're separated or they're divorced and they don't understand the process after they grieved, how do you begin anew? Because you still haven't reconstructed your life, so to speak, or begin anew. And that would be georgiashaffer.com/rebuild membership.
We will make sure that we put all of that information in the show notes that you can find at drmichelleb.com. Georgia, thank you for coming on the program, for sharing your story, your pain, your wounds, and your sacred scars to glorify God and encourage others. Friends, I hope that there was something in this conversation today that has encouraged your heart. Maybe you're going through something that you never asked to go through, and it's no fault of your own. I hope that you're encouraged to continue to seek God and to seek out wise counsel in the hands of those who will remind you of God's truth in love. Maybe you're going, things are really good right now, but you have a friend who's going through a difficult time. Consider sharing this episode with them. And while you're at it, consider picking up a copy of Sacred Scars, resting in God's promise that your past is not wasted. I'm looking forward to sharing another Sacred Scar story with you next week. Until we meet again, may you have a hope-filled week.